I think it's time.
Hi, good afternoon, aloha. So welcome to the panel Queer Politics, Agit-Prop and Editorial Comics as an eyewitness. If you don't understand anything of what I'm saying or something, just feel free to ask. English is not my first language, so I can repeat stuff or draw. This panel will explore the medium of reportage, the advantages and shortcomings of making comics from a personal point of view on events to document, reflect, gain public space and alter perspectives. Okay, I'm in German, that's also interesting. My name is Beldan. This is Bo, Mike, Marguerite and James, Carlos and Joana. And we will each tell something on the subject. I will start by, with this actually. Recently my interest in making comics is like, can I do comics quick enough and like really quick on current events and how to distribute them in a very fast way? And can I include the queer perspective? And what is the advantage of a comic in contrast to, for example, a photograph? In 2013 there was an uprising in Istanbul. And I live in Amsterdam, I'm Turkish and I live in Amsterdam. It affected me, but I was not part of it. I was living in a country which was interesting in the news for one day, but then it faded out. And I found an outlet my publisher asked me if I want to make an ebook on events. And I did that by quickly gathering information and making a book. What often gets lost in the media is that the queer perspective. The movement in Istanbul, the Gezi Park movement, the uprising, which had a huge impact, was started by queer and trans people mainly. And I think that is an advantage because I can focus on that and I can put I can tell the story from that perspective. With images that would be otherwise not necessarily seen. I lost. So let me go through this. This was recent event 6 weeks ago. Again in Istanbul, publisher asks something happened in a courthouse, a hostage taking. Can I explain it to the Italian public? My publisher in Italy. I did it in one day, and it got distributed 2 days later. So in 2 days, a comic was done, telling very clearly on questions which is a bit hard to understand for outsiders. Also, an advantage is what sometimes gets lost in media, I think. Something is said as the Prime Minister or the President of the Turkish Republic and a judge. When someone lies, it gets lost through the time funnel, and you have to get a lot of information to see, oh my God, it was a lie, or it fades out. But in comics, you can just put two panels together and then you can just clearly make a statement. So I think it's an advantage to put stuff together. Say, hey, this guy's lying. And it is based on facts. December, I was in New York with the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And again, I found it handy from all the media stream, all the photos, constant photos you get, with a lot of background, with a lot of things to take certain images out and to give it a certain perspective, something I want to tell to comics, what I find important, and then to depict that and spread it through the internet and spread it to exhibitions, whatever is possible as fast as I can. This is the original, and I think, from my point of view, the focus is a bit different. Same here, this is the picture, and I wanted him to look at us and to make a statement. So, that's what I do. It was a bit quick, but I hope it was clear. Next.
I'll just introduce myself very quickly because most of the people don't know me here. I studied graphic design in Portugal, and when I finished, I decided to go and do volunteer work in a country in Eastern Europe called Lithuania. And I worked in an LGBT association there. Just a quick fact, like Lithuania is the only country in the European Union that has this censorship law, like in Russia. So they have this propaganda law and it's legal. And during the time that I was there, there was a Pride March this law was used for the first time. There was also the European Union presidency, which was in Lithuania at the time. So there were all these events that I cared very deeply about. And when I came back to my home country, Portugal, I wanted to write a comic book, kind of telling people what I had witnessed and what had been going on there. And one of my biggest worries while I was working on this project was that no one will care. Like, most people don't even know where Lithuania is. Why would they want to read about the LGBT movement there? And what will make people feel attracted to read such a thing, such a specific thematic? And so I prepared a presentation kind of explaining at least what worked for me to make people care about something that is so foreign to them, like queer politics, especially queer politics in a country they barely even know. And for me, I think one of the things that worked well was the fact that it's a comic book, because I think comic books can attract readers to read about things that maybe they wouldn't feel drawn to otherwise. And though that's not the reason why I decided to make a comic book, of course, it's working visually. It's a medium that helps me much more to be subtle and to pass information that maybe would be boring if I did it in another way. One of the things that I thought a lot about while I was writing the book was also about my readers, because I knew they were going to be very diverse. There were going to be especially two people that read a lot about LGBT things and know a lot about it, and people who are just interested in comics in general and never read about anything queer. So I had to do this constant balance of, I had to explain enough for the people to understand the story, but not too much that it was constantly interrupting the narrative and sounded patronizing. The readers don't know enough. Well, I'm smarter. And so one of the things that worked also well for me was that I did this thing where I mixed up some of the things that were happening in Lithuania, and they were very specific from that time and place, and these political things, with some characters and some episodes of daily life, and my daily life, that were much more relatable and familiar. So yes, I had these things that were very specific and much more political, and others that were much more private, I guess. And I felt comfortable about doing that because, in a way, I was writing this book not from the perspective of an impersonal bystander. I was part of the action in a way, so it made sense that my character would also not detach herself from what she's witnessing, and she would be part of what she's narrating. This felt really important to me at the time, because while doing the research and while living there, I read a lot about articles and saw some documentaries made by Western people about Eastern European countries, especially Lithuania, and especially talking about this post-Soviet homophobia. And I felt like they were very distancing themselves from that and saying how exotic and crazy these countries are, and so far from our reality. And for me, that I was there, I thought a lot of these documentaries were very sensationalistic and were missing out a lot of the good and super positive things that were happening there. So I tried my best to give both the good and the bad equal share of importance, and not detach myself from the subject. So to sum up, the fact that it's a comic book, being attentive to your readers and not assume that they don't know enough, but also not assume that they know everything about mixing up the private and the political. And I think finally, one of the things that is most important when you're writing, when you want people to care about something that is foreign to them, like queer politics, is the fact that you, as the author, you care. And if you do a good job, that will show in your work. And others will understand why that's such a cool subject to read about, and with so many nuances. And And yeah, I guess that goes for everything.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay. Next will be Marguerite and James.
Sorry, James.
All right. Well, I did a book, started a project with David Wojnarowicz, who is quite a well-known artist, writer, filmmaker, AIDS activist. David passed away in 1993. Marguerite and I ran a gallery called Ground Zero in the East Village of New York City in the mid-'80s. This is a show that David did at our gallery. It was called You Killed Me First. The installation, basically, they took the gallery over, made the front of it look like a garbage dump. It said no parking, 24 hours, access was all garbage. That's the top. Then you go down to that wall and look through that window, and this is what you saw inside the room, was 3 corpses sitting around this like Thanksgiving dinner. In the corner there's a video playing this film, which was basically about this young kind of punk girl, gets a lot of flack and abuse from her family, and at Thanksgiving dinner she shoots them all one by one. David played the father, and he based the character on his own father. So, like, when you're looking at it, he just totally overplayed it. It was, like, crazy. And at the end, you see, it's like, this corpse is him. So,
the mother's played by Karen Finley, and the movie is made by
Richard Karn.
Richard Karn. And the ingenue is Long Leg.
Right. So, we showed David, we did another show with him later on that was called Mexican Diaries, which led to the film that he did called Fire in My Belly that was censored by the Smithsonian in the last half a dozen years. There was a big controversy. David had his own issues. And after he passed away, his work still stimulates controversy. Anyway, in 1986, he knew that Marguerite and I we did our own comic also called Ground Zero, which is a sort of autobiographical, kind of science fictionized memoir of our lives. And he said, I'd like to do my life as a comic. And at that time, in 86, there was very few gay comics. There might have been literally gay comics, the gay comic. There was only one, and there was Howard Cruz, and I don't think Allison Bechdel was even working yet. It really was very, very little going on at that time. So I started this book with David. I did the first part. It took me 8 years to finish this thing, because I wasn't just doing comics. So in terms of brevity, getting these things out in a timely fashion, I wasn't any good at that. But see, here's David's painting from I can't believe you got this, but did I send you this?
Yeah, you sent me that.
This is his painting from Mexico, which is actually, this was in our show, our second show with him. This is called The Portrait of Bishop Landa, and Bishop Landa was historically the guy that went down to Mexico and destroyed the codex. He destroyed, Mayan history. So, and he blew this painting, actually had fireworks attached to it. So at the opening, there was Joe Coleman, this artist, was there with his cigar. And we were like, oh my God, stay away from the painting.
Jake kept going.
He's like, yeah, I'm going to blow this thing up. It's a tiny little gallery. Anyway, for the film that got censored by the Smithsonian, David had blown this painting up. So you see it exploding in the film that caused all this trouble. Anyway, moving along. I started doing this book with David in 1986. It took I think David died in 1993. I had to finish the last part after he passed away. I had we'd met and done meetings for the first 2 parts. We were talking about the third part, but then he really got sick and I couldn't finish it with him. So I had to finish the last part based on the notes and conversations we had. So I pulled text out of various sources, and his boyfriend let me have his diary, and I actually went up to his apartment and drew it.
Yeah, so this is what it looks like after.
So that was,
So people always think that the comic came out of Close to the Knives. It came out of this.
This is actually the scroll I made from the notes that David gave me. So for instance, up at the top there says, staircases, the armchairs of the poor. That's a Wojnarowicz kind of thing that he would do. These kind of odd things that would end up being his title or something. But, you can see that's his writing, there's my writing. And I took this pile of stuff, notes, it was journal entries, or he'd meet some dude out on the street, he'd write down, he'd get home that night, and he'd write down a monologue of what the guy had said to him. And he had this whole thing, and I cut it up to make it kind of work into a narrative format. So this is the note. Then, you know, after he died, I tried to represent, this is the more recent version that came out from Fantagraphics. Like the first edition came out through DC Comics, believe it or not. And they did get a sort of a plastic digital separation on that. This is back to Marguerite's original one. Marguerite did the color, and she did a very punchy job on the color. And this is one of the pages that it's in the new edition that wasn't in the first edition. Actually, it was funny because in the first edition, I didn't have any rendering of him as an artist at all. And then I saw somewhere online, somebody goes, there's no idea that this guy was an artist. So I added back in this page where he talks about why he's working in such an intense way. And his work really did, towards the end, take on a very powerful tone to it, because he was dying, and he lost all his friends. So what his work was about before, kind of
being a child, being a child prostitute, and then being a young adult, gay young adult, and how that challenges your life. So it started off as a queer comic with other social issues. After we were going through it, he was diagnosed. So when we began it, he wasn't diagnosed, but we were in the middle of the AIDS crisis, which was gathering steam as we went along. So after his death, James worked from his journals and the remnants. Then the shift obviously has happened, that it now is a discussion of AIDS and how that affects what was essentially a development of this queer identity, and how it was directly affecting him because of his sexuality, and and he was a very, very strong activist. So, but
it went from being really about gay identity to being about, somehow it got taken over by the idea of illness, in a sense. Yeah. I think that kind of hijacked the issues of gay rights for some period, because it was
so just to say that the topic, part of the topic of this is witnessing, and so in a sense we're seeing and reporting, but we're also for in the case of David, on somebody who's been through some sort of traumatic experience, or has even passed away, we're actually speaking for them in a sense, because what we may have wanted to see, shifting consciousness, to say they were already in collaboration with you. So it's a very strange mixture. So we're working now with somebody's active speech or their writing, which is now in comics becomes sort of performative. We're able to show things, we're able to put them into action. So, and I think that sort of it sort of brings back into being their physicality at the intersection of their language. So, and the other thing I wanted to say about this is that the use of the image, particularly in this area, maps onto the body. We're using the body literally in the images. So we're using this sort of mapping of the body, and where we're talking about trauma and illness and gender, it becomes very literal, and it gives you an opportunity to really, in a sense, use this medium for propaganda, or as a method, and I can't say truth-telling, but as some vehicle of expression. So, and I think, although it's uncomfortable to add, to put gender and side by side, that happens, that comics still afford us, because of this idea that maps the body, and because of this debate is happening across the body in general, that it allows us to still have a platform for issues of health, especially for women's reproductive rights and men's rights, in ways that, how our health needs to be addressed, and to reclaim that. And this actually, I think, so just in terms of the propaganda of this aspect, I think that's a really important thing that comics can do, in a way that we're able to take things to the limit of representation. What's palatable or tasteful to see, can be negotiated in this way. So we're able to enter into like worlds that are far beyond what you can just do with photographs or news reportage. So, sorry to preach, but this is about propaganda, and that is what we think this can do.
Well, the only other point I'd make is that, I don't know, now, the version, I mean, David wanted this thing, he said, he didn't see himself and so we mainstream, I mean, you could have mainstreamed in comics, they printed 20, I think that much gone farther to a bigger audience than any of David's other work, and I'm not sure, but I think he'd be happy about that, and we've gotten a lot of response over the years from people that saw the comics, so the comics are a pop medium. That's what he wanted.
And it was done. I mean, it's as scary as this is to say, it was done for teenagers who might be homeless in the first place. We were thinking, let's reach these kids who are on the street, who are selling their bodies down on the west side then. Because it's very expensive to sell it on the west side at this point, but it's fairly cheap then. Prices have gone.
Right.
Yeah, great. I mean, there are a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions, but we will do them at the end. So.
Yeah, whatever you want to do with it.
Next one, Bo. Would you like to do your picture?
Sure, that'd be great. That's okay, I can reach. Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming to the panel. My name is Bo, and I'm currently based in the Bay Area, and I'm new to making comics, so I'm honored to be here and be part of this space. I want to talk about how comics functions as a medium for community building and queer survival, and also the challenges of creating a autobiographical work. So I want to talk about these topics through the work that I'm currently creating, and also sort of like I'm struggling to address these issues in my work. I'm creating a long-form graphic memoir called Memory of an Avalanche, and it's about my immigration history as well as my gender history, as these intertwined identities intersect with nonprofit sanctioned community violence. The story takes place in LA about 3 years ago, 2011, 2012. And so just a real brief synopsis. I came to the US on a student visa. And as soon as I graduated, I was frantically trying to secure a work permit, work visa, so that I could legally stay here. So the process of securing a work visa is really complicated. So you had to find a community organization to sponsor for a work visa. So what I did, I was desperate, and I landed on this kind of trans community organization in LA who promised to sponsor me for a work visa. So what I ended up doing was that I volunteered for this organization for a year, and the very last minute, a lot of things happened, and it turned out that they stood me up. And in the end, my visa ran out. I became undocumented, and at the same time, I was transitioning from female to male. So basically, the story is about the moment when I was transitioning, becoming undocumented, and dealing with community violence all at the same time. So I just want to show you guys some samples of my work, and so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create visual and kind of using visual and narrative conventions to portray the concept of multiple oppressions and intersectional violence. So for this image, for example, I'm hoping to use this as a back cover of my graphic novel. So you could see sort of like 4 intersecting panels. I'm hoping to institutional from sort of like the first panel being school, educational institutions, and then to the idea of industrial complex. So nonprofit industrial complex in this sense, and then down to the third panel, which is there's rainbow flags and a sort of a fence communicating the idea of the border, border immigration enforcement, and sort of how queer rights and queer activism have played into this sort of marginalization of queer immigrants. And the last panel, so sort of these 3 main characters are sort of the people I want to focus on. So have the protagonist, which is me, and my friend who is sort of like the top figure in that panel, who's a Black genderqueer person from the Midwest, and then my partner, who's queer Latina from LA, who's on the bottom. So yeah, it's gonna be it's a story about that revolves around these three characters. So I want to show sort of how institutional oppression play out in interpersonal dynamics and how to form coalitional sort of support networks. And so I want to show you the next one. This is the first sequence that I'm still creating. It's called Dissected, and it's a moment before exactly 1 year before DOMA was struck down. So that meant that only kind of opposite-sex couples were the only folks who could get married and immigrate or obtain legal status through marriage petition. So what happened at this point in the story was that I was undocumented at the time, and we were trying to, my partner and I were trying to pass as a straight couple to get a green card. And I don't know if you guys can see, so I can just read through this. So my partner in top panel, this one's got pretty good reviews, referring to the Yelp page of the courthouse. The friend said, "Ha ha, what a red carpet deal." And the partner said, "Here's American dream for you, Bo." And Bo was like, "Yeah, right." So I'm also using kind of manga conventions of paneling and this spacing, and there's a little kind of word bubble of the silent moment there, and Bo's kind of pondering American dream, huh? And so the next page, in front of the courthouse, the friend said, "Alrighty, lucky duckies." And partner says, "See you in a bit." And you see Bo sort of pulling down his shirt. And then as they walked into the courthouse, it says, "It's okay." The partner says, "It's okay, I'll do all the talking." And so at this point, I already started testosterone, but I was sort of at the very beginning stage of it. So my voice wasn't as low, and so it was kind of difficult to pass as a male and to get a green card. So my partner was kind of doing this kind of chair-taking role to sort of make this process as kind of successful as possible. And then we got inside the courthouse. There's a sign that says, "Attention, we do not marry same-sex unions. Do not inquire, no exceptions." And then the bottom panel, the partner was kind of whispering, "Just keep your mouth shut, okay?" And the court, as the worker said, "How can I help you?" At the last page of the sequence, she said, "Sure." And partner said, "We would like to get a marriage license, please." And ended on a cliffhanger. So yes, it's the idea of gender profiling and passing. So, and I kind of redid my first page in Alison Bechdel style. So I just kind of wanted to explore sort of different ways of approaching the moments of vulnerability. And one of the ideas that I kind of, I just sort of mimicked her way of using literary language by me using academic language to kind of illustrate the vulnerability of this moment. And it's, the liberal notion of choice finds no better expression than in the democratic evaluation of a state of paradise. Partner says, yes, be interpolated into the discourse of action, and then invitation to mobility. So I just kind of, I'm still experimenting with different styles, and and going in my work, the idea of using fiction as a narrative device, because I cannot possibly remember everything that everybody said. I only remember that sign that was in the courthouse. So what I'm trying to do is to sort of, as part of character building and narrative building, just came up with dialogue or actions that would exaggerate certain kind of moments of vulnerability. So for example, the redone page on the right-hand side, I made a separation between sort of like the partner and the friend versus the protagonist to highlight sort of like the idea of legal status as a privilege. And so you have like on one side, you have like US citizens of color, and on the other side, an undocumented person. And sort of like how there is a spatial distinguish, kind of playing with space, or even sort of like the grouping of like, you are sort of like being like US citizens, feel like this is a win. But then there's like this, person who doesn't have legal status, who cannot like participate. This is not like how it went down. I wanted to kind of pack in this idea, this moment of vulnerability, and exaggerate it. So it's again like using fiction as a narrative device, and not everyone's going to agree with me. This is just from my perspective, and that's another kind of piece I'm toying with like the idea of authorship. That this is a graphic novel about community violence, and people are going to have like different viewpoints on this what had happened. And so I just kind of I'm hoping for this work to open up dialogue around these important issues that are not really being talked about. So I know I don't want to take up too much time. These are some other pages that I made. That was the day before my legal status was up, and at the same time I was sort of like feeling the kind of the effects of testosterone was taking place, and it was making me really hard to cry, or like to this emotions, like kind of my emotionality was shifting. And so it was just kind of illustrating this like vulnerability at the point where you are losing community but you can't cry. This is sort of, I'm hoping for this to be the first page, introducing the setting of the story. It was in Koreatown, Los Angeles. So I did a kind of zoom in, zoom out. That's like a sketch of the piles of paperwork, the avalanche of paper. Okay, so yeah, so that was it, the beginning of my project. Thank you.
Next is Bo, and after that is Carlo, and after that is Mike. So.
Hi.
Go take over.
Okay.
Now we're going to check out my presentation. Just one moment, please. Okay, so
It's quick.
let's see. We just hi everybody. Thank you, Carlo Quispe. And these comments you're going to be seeing right now are going to be published later this year. Or three group of that are really from all over the world, but the editor group is here in New York City, and so there's many contributors and also like many editors. So there's not just one. Also, there's not just one editor for the magazine, and we try to. There's like I think maybe 46 issues now. It's been, and then we try to do it annually. Also, we've tried to do it like, to have like 2 issues in 1 year, but that's really difficult. So right now we're doing one issue per year. So the kind of topics the way that we decide how to make the comics is by having each issue be one specific topic. The issue coming up this year is youth organizing. So it leaves it so that the artist can feel free to be very broad. Although these stories have to do with youth organizing, they also are focusing on what the youth are organizing about, right? So this story is called Come Out of the Shadows, and it's celebrating 5 years of the Coming Out of the Shadows campaign, which is trying to illustrate how undocumented immigrants are starting to organize and lose their fear, of what may happen to them, and are basically they're what is the word exactly? Disclosing their status as undocumented, so that they, can stop living in shame and fear, and start also getting help from other communities that are also invested in more freedom, right? So this story here is titled Political Will because that's the name of my little title character. Political Will is this youth organizer who is too political for his own good, and he's always trying to connect with somebody, but at the end he will probably find something wrong with that person, and then because every time you see Political Will, he's always alone. It's kind of like Casper the Ghost. It's all about making friends, but then to be able to start the story again, they have to start alone, right? So something happened in between, the ending of the last cartoon and then the beginning of the new cartoon, where this character's alone again. But that's also, I'm trying to, talk about political issues, but using this one character as a person, who is either new to the issue or perhaps, will be more familiar to the reader than the people that Political will encounter, who are usually way more political than he is, and have something to teach him, right? So I'm using like a really standard kind of grid, just because there's so much, in the magazine, there's so much experimentation going on, and very effective, use, of the comics. And so when people turn to my comic, it's just like just there's a visual difference there. And let's see. Okay, so Political Will says, "Hey, can I video you? I'm Will," and the person who he's talking to says, "I'm Nadia." So there's always things going on around the characters that are going to be describing the scene. They're at a rally at this moment, and so Political Will is one of these people who document the events that are going on, but it's somebody who is not afraid to get involved with their subject. This is not a person who is completely separated from the topic they're exploring. She even assumes that he is also undocumented because they're speaking Spanish, and she says, "Oh wait, what's your status?" And he says, "I'm here legally." And then she says to him, "Then you're an ally, and don't be afraid to be an advocate." So that's I'm always trying to include little pieces of wisdom for people who are reading the comic, who are looking for answers, right? So here's a little bit permission, to be an advocate, even though you may not be part of that community. I know that I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but I definitely think it helps. So the scene jumps to just a couple of weeks later, where Nadia is doing a sit-in at Senator McCain's office. These are all real events, and the characters that I'm using are based upon real people, but there's so many activists that I can't really choose one. So what I've done is create an amalgam of many people, and then created this activist character, Nadia, right? And what's interesting about her is that even though she takes these political actions, she also has her own private aspirations. She's a doctor, okay? She can't get arrested, right? At 5 o'clock, they're going to consider everybody who's sitting into the office, they're going to be considering them loitering. So they decide that she's going to go and talk to the press instead of getting arrested, right? So she has her own private reasons why she is not going to go through with what everybody else is going to go through. but they've all agreed that it's probably for the best. The reason why they're doing a sit-in in Senator McCain's office is because even though he had always supported DREAM Act, he was up for re-election. So he withdrew his support for the DREAM Act. And so they went to his office to shame him about it, even though he became, re-elected. They did point out the fact that he had withdrawn his support. And also, what they wanted to discuss is that these undocumented immigrants are students, not criminals, right? What they wanted to be doing is socially upstanding. And they are trying to really give a face to the people who were up for the DREAM Act, right? And we all know that didn't happen. But because of all of the work that they did do, eventually, there were some executive actions regarding immigration. But still, they're not, enough for what these people are asking for. 5 years later, they're still protesting about, their liberty. So here we see Nadia. Nadia is still around. And now we are going to get to know more about Nadia, because now it's not only about being an undocumented immigrant, it's also about being unafraid, unapologetic. It's about putting shame where it really belongs, which is in Indiana and Arizona and their horrible laws. And I'm also in love with the language that these activists are using. So it's very easy for me to take their language and create timeless, because this topics I'm discussed many years ago, but the perpetual conflicts I want to show is how this struggle is never over. It just keeps going, right? So here the topics just get even more deep. She says, revealing my status publicly empowers me and my family, and we're all against deportations. And they say, not one more. Why are queers excluded from comprehensive immigration reform? What about trans people? In the back says Mexico. It's important that the word Mexico is there, because part of the struggle, with like immigrant communities, I'm from Peru. I'm always saying like, oh, I'm not an American, but then Americans don't like that. They want me to embrace the larger American culture. So for a lot of activists, they have when it came to the DREAM Act, they omitted their national origin, nation of origin, because they just want to fit in more, right? But a lot of people are sick of that. And they're making sure that they know that even though they're immigrants, they are in America, they still have an attachment to their country of origin, right? And so they also say, not only does it say Mexico, it says not a dreamer, and it says DACA, not enough, right? Every single person in our community is affected by the 3 million deportations, not one more, right? Then they go on to discuss a bit about, how shocking it is to see these immigrants chained up to the deportation buses and stuff like that. And actually, I have them speaking about certain images that perhaps for me would be too, I don't know, not cheap, but it's also, the images that they're using are specifically designed to tug at people's heartstrings, It's supposed to cause an emotional effect. But what I'm trying to do is have a conversation about tactics. This is not necessarily a critique or coming down on the extremist actions, but at least to point out the fact that they are out there. We are aware of them, and also that we are aware of how effective they are. but I'm only talking about them. I'm not showing them to you because perhaps it would feel to the reader that it's too manipulative. You already know the people who are buying this comic already have like a chip on their shoulder. They already side with the underdog. So I don't have to beat them over the head with an image of a undocumented immigrant chained up to the wheel of a deportation bus, right? That's already, you get why that's shocking. You know, I don't have to really show you that, I can just discuss it. And also, it's almost like getting away with full frontal nudity in an all ages venue when you are saying the words penis, vagina, or genitals or whatever. You can say those words, right? You can read them in a novel, but if you show those images instead of the pictures, then it would become porn, right? So I also don't want to like display. That's not my image of the undocumented immigrant. It's not somebody who's chained up to a deportation bus, even though they did that. That was just an image to really shock people and reach people, right? I can just allude to that and move on to the next thing, which is more like my wrap up here for this conversation. Is about the next steps. You know, what's next? Some people benefited from the president's actions, but he's still deporting like crazy. The next steps are to build more and more solidarity and find justice for ourselves. This goes, you know, this is a philosophy more than you know, an end political goal. Find justice for ourselves is really, you know, what we're all trying to do. So I'm just trying to, you know, get everybody on this on my side, get everybody on the side of the people who are struggling. She says, we organize now with many groups, with the youth leading the way. What about queer youth? There are more deportations now than ever, with a disproportionately high number of trans women who face hell in male deportation jails. Hell as in sexual assault and abuse. The organizers that I talked to, they stopped some deportations, especially when the detained person has some support. So here is like the ultimate answer to, like, you know, people who are like saying, you know, my God, I'm so afraid of being, you know, deported, being put in jail. There actually are people who will get you out. So they say if it's just you, then you totally should be afraid. But when we make sure that the judges and ICE know that the person they detained is a community with them, they are not alone out there by themselves. That's the actual end of the comic. But political will always connects